Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. This week we will be doing Frank Herberts Dune. If you guys have been enjoying this content, please do not forget, like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you guys do not miss a video. If anyone is new to the channel or missed my last book review video, was ranking the Kingdom Keepers series, so I will leave a link to that video and the Kingdom Keepers playlist if you want to re-watch all those videos. As with all my videos, if you guys have any books you want me to do reviews on in the future, please do not be afraid to leave those down in the comments. Book review format, summary of the story, pros, cons, and then my final thought ranking. So, with all that out of the way, let's hit the intro. Okay, so coming to the summary of the story here, we follow our main protagonist, Paul Atreides, and his family as they are moving to the planet of Arrakis, aka Dune. They are brought to this planet because the Emperor of the Haddrac Empire ordered them to take command of the planet from their longtime rivals, the Harconens. So the reason Dune is so valuable, it is the only planet in the universe where the spice melange can be found and mined. And basically, spice is this super powerful drug that fuels the entire empire. So whoever controls this planet has a massive amount of influence in what happens. So the Atreides are super suspicious of the move because they believe it is a trap set from the Emperor and the Harkonnens working together, and they end up being completely right. As soon as this trap is sprung, Jessica and Paul have to go into hiding in the deserts of Dune, where they become adopted by the natives of the planet, the Fremen. Real quick, this next section has a lot of really weird words, so if I butcher the pronunciation of any of it, I'm sorry, it's really hard to read. So, while Paul is with the Fremen, he eventually finds out that he is Quazack Haddrac, an all-powerful super being that the group called the Bene Gesuit have been trying to bring about for millions and millions of years through genetic breeding. So, with his newfound Quazack Haddrac powers, he unites the Fremen all together under his command, and he eventually is able to overthrow the current Emperor and become the Emperor himself. So, jumping into our pro section with pro number 1, Paul Atreides. So I find Paul actually a really good protagonist because in stories like this, you really see like one particular house being the purely good house and one being the pure evil house. Herbert has some of that, but he doesn't necessarily make the Atreides all good. Paul exemplifies this a little bit. He's very just ruthless and efficient, and he's willing to do whatever it takes to regain his throne. So it's good to just see a difference between someone like the Starks from Game of Thrones, who are all good, to someone like Paul, who's a bit more ruthless and cunning and willing to do whatever it takes. The Harkonnens are kind of your more traditional evil family. That's fine. They work for the villains of this story, but it's Paul I'm really interested in. He is a very good protagonist, like I said. He's very interesting to follow around during the story. So the other reason I really like Paul is after he gets his Quazack Haddrac powers, how Herbert writes his change from really smart before all this happens, after he is just insane. I'm not gonna say any of his powers because they explain a lot of that in the book, but what happens to Paul is he just gets, I don't know, he gains like just some sort of god complex because he can see the future and the past, and that really messes with a person. And I feel like Herbert does a really, really good job writing how Paul is feeling while all that change is going on. It takes him a while to adjust to what's going on. So he writes it relatably that Paul is reacting to such a crazy change. Any of us would like, what is going on? But eventually Paul does accept what's going on, and he becomes just such an awesome character after that, his Quazack Haddrac power. So, for pro number 2 is the fact that this is not a regular feeling sci-fi book. So normally in a sort of a more traditional sci-fi book that I would read, there's like massive battle fleets and everything else, and you know what tropes I'm talking about. But in this, this book is really, really contained. It takes place like 90% of the time is on Arrakis. And I feel like that's a really good change from like a star system wide conflict. I feel like Herbert does a really good job making the world feel expansive while only having the most of the story take place on the one planet. It's a credit to Herbert's writing that is able to make Dune feel so much better and different than any of the regular sci-fi books I've read recently. While I was reading Dune, I'm like, this has a much different feel than sci-fi books I've read in the past, and I really appreciated the change in the atmosphere and the tone that Dune brought. So some of the examples of this are, one, the Bene Gesuit, who I mentioned earlier, is this crazy cult order of women monks who are trying to bring about the Quazack Haddrac. That is such a different concept, and I feel like Herbert does this really well. He writes the Bene Gesuit super extremely interestingly because they are an order that are trying to bring about the Quazack Haddrac, but unintentionally they bring the Quazack Haddrac into the world via Paul. They unintentionally do that, but the concept of the Bene Gesuit is just really, really interesting to me because I've never really read a story that has a group like the Bene Gesuit in it. So second thing that really sets Dune apart is the Fremen. They are such an interesting culture, an interesting people with a bunch of real-world correlations built in, which I am always there for. If you give me some culture from a book that has real-world sort of ties, I will be all the more interested to find out what they'll continue to draw from. And Herbert's Fremen are no different. They have a bunch of nomadic influences, and that is also a really good use of that sort of culture. Like, if you're going to be on a sand planet like Dune, why wouldn't you make a native people that are nomads? And it makes all sorts of sense, and I am all for a culture like the Fremen existing within this book, and I feel like Herbert does a really good job writing them. Alright guys, coming to our third and final pro, we have Jessica. So surprisingly, as I was reading this book, I really started to like Jessica as a character. She's in the book almost as much as Paul is, because they sort of flip between the two of them. So Jessica becomes just as important to the story as Paul is. And because of that, we get a lot of her mindset. And what I really thought Herbert did a really good job with was writing Jessica's conflict between being part of the Bene Gesuit and wanting to bring about the Quazack Haddrac and knowing what her duty is, as opposed to her duty as a mother to Paul and trying to protect him and figure out what they have to do. And it is a really good dynamic conflict that Herbert writes this really well and really very compellingly. Even though she is somewhat of a side character, it makes her super interesting to follow. Coming to the con section, we have to discuss Dune's ending. So my main problem with the ending of Dune is just how abrupt this ending to me seems. We're following Paul as he's training under the Fremen. The Empire attacks them, and Paul just decides, welp, now's the time to take over. So it's kind of an abrupt ending. There was build up for Paul to become the emperor throughout the story, but I think what could have worked a bit better is if Herbert cut back on the Fremen stuff and sort of built this ending more. I feel like it really would have worked better. Don't get me wrong, the ending itself is pretty good. What actually happens at the ending is good. My only problem with it is how fast it happens. Like I said, he's training with the Fremen, and then he's just taking over the Empire. There's very little sort of changeover from the middle of the story to the very end. Like I said before, I feel like if Herbert had cut down on the Fremen desert stuff and like built up the attack that the Empire does on Dune, it would have made the ending flow a bit better. But other than that, I really do enjoy this ending. Alright guys, so final thought and ranking here. I really like Dune. Like I said in my pros section, all the characters we follow are super interesting, as well as the world is super interesting. It feels a lot different than most sci-fi books, like I said in my pros section. Just because it feels a lot different, all the characters are super interesting to follow. I really do highly recommend Dune to any sci-fi fan. And also, if you guys plan to go see the Dune movie, you might as well read this book ahead of time. So I'm going to give Frank Herberts Dune a 9 out of 10. Thank you so much for making it to the end of the video. Please do not forget, like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you guys do not miss a video. So down in the comments, if you have read Dune before, drop your review of the book down in the comments. I would love to discuss what everyone thinks of it if they've read it before. Also, if you have any books you want me to do reviews on in the future, do not be afraid to drop those down in the comments as well. So next week's book review, we will be reviewing Neil Shusterman's Scythe. So till then, have a great week, and don't forget, keep on reading.